Olivia Colman was wonderful. How good a job do you think she did in that role?
Just extraordinary. Beyond belief, really. She absolutely occupied the character.
So you must have, I mean, you know, obviously Best Actress now at the BAFTAs. Do you think she stands a chance at the Oscars? Would you like to see her win? And if so, why?
I'd like to see her win because she'd be winning in The Favourite, and that would be wonderful. But I think you can't really predict these things, and it's best not to look forward. One of my producers, Lee, told me a good few months back, just live every day as it goes and don't think about tomorrow. Olivia's just one of these wonderful, warm human beings, and everybody loves her, and she's such a laugh. Every time she makes a speech, she seems to just do it completely ad hoc and make the whole audience laugh out loud with her. And I think also it was very good of her to re-emphasise that this was a film about a female triangle and all three women had a major role to play, but it wasn't possible for all of them to be in the Best Actress category.
Was that part of what made it difficult to get this film made, in that, you know, we're not used to seeing women carry a film in this way?
I wasn't involved in seeking finance because Cece was the producer on this, but I know from speaking to her that she had huge challenges finding producers and financiers who would want to come on board a film that was dominated by three women and where the plot pivoted around a female triangle and where there was quite a strong lesbian content in it. So yes, it was not easy to get this film financed. I feel very happy to be sitting here in the London Library where I first found this story, talking to you about how it came to be made a film. That's an extraordinary feeling. I spent many, many months here.
So what convinced you that they were actually lovers rather than just friends?
I don't know whether I was completely convinced, but the evidence from the time was that there were strong lesbian tendencies, both between the Queen and Sara. The Queen's love letters were very passionate, and historians describe them as love letters. And then the source material for Abigail being the Queen's lover actually comes from Sara herself. And she was the one who hurled the accusation at Anne. And Anne was absolutely furious about it. And there was also a ballad that was sung in the coffee houses at the time that Sara was instrumental in writing and getting published, and that described the dirty chambermaid who was in the Queen's bedchamber.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm going to read you first the letters. I'm going to read an extract from the letters that Sara wrote to her granddaughter. And she said to Diana, "For my own part, if I were a young woman and was in circumstances to choose my lot, I had rather marry a man of sense with good morals than the emperor of the world that was a brute and a fool." And there you have Sara's character. I then want to move on to Sara's memoir that she published at the end of her life. And this was the extract where she discovered that Abigail had replaced her in the Queen's affections. And Abigail was, of course, her young cousin that she had introduced to the bedchamber. And she wrote about the shock of discovering that the two of them, Abigail and Anne, had gone behind her back. The first thing that led me into inquiries about her conduct was the being told in the summer of 1707 that my cousin Abigail was privately married to Mr. Masham. I went to her and asked her if it was true. She owned it was and begged my pardon for having concealed it from me. I embraced her with my usual tenderness and very heartily wished her joy. I then inquired of her very kindly whether the Queen knew of her marriage, and very innocently offered her my service if she needed it to make that matter easy. She had by this time learnt the art of dissimulation pretty well, and answered with an air of unconcernedness that the bedchamber women had already acquainted the Queen with it, hoping by this answer to divert any further examination into the matter. But I went presently to the Queen and asked her, why had she not been so kind as to tell me of my cousin's marriage? expostulating with her upon the point, and putting her in mind of what she used often to say to me out of Montaigne, that it was no breach of promise of secrecy to tell such a friend anything, because it was no more than telling it to oneself. All the answer I could get from Her Majesty was this: "I have 100 times bid Masham tell it to you, and she would not." The conduct of both the Queen and of Mrs. Masham convinced me that there was some mystery in the affair, and I set myself to inquire as particularly as I could into it. And in less than a week's time I discovered that my cousin was become an absolute favourite, that the Queen herself was present at her marriage in Dr. Arbuthnot's lodgings, at which time Her Majesty had called for a round sum out of the privy purse. That was for her dowry. That Mrs. Masham came often to the Queen when the Prince was asleep, and was generally 2 hours every day in private with her. And I likewise then discovered beyond all dispute Mr. Harley's correspondence and interest at court by means of this woman. I was struck with astonishment at such an instance of ingratitude, and should not have believed it if there had been any room left for doubting.